Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the conclusion of the front row of the edition 2024, which concludes, like every year, as usual, with the presentation of the catwalks of Antonio Patruno Randolfi, who is here with us, who, until the very last minute, has analyzed all the fashion shows and catwalks that are still going on. So the fashion week is not concluded yet. It's still happening. Everything is still happening up until Monday. So what was in calendar before today is in the analysis of Antonio, and who we're expecting very anxiously to hear what happened this week. So Antonio, up to you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Diana. Thank you. Really, thank you, everyone, for being here. And I'm always really excited because closing this event of Istituto Marangoni, which is exceptional, it's always such a great honor for me because there have been 3 very intense days full of incredible events. So it's such an honor for me to conclude this front row of this year with this topic, hyper-essentialism, which initially worried me a bit in the definition of what will then be my lecture, because I thought, oh my God, I'm used to normally to talk about a brand in particular. Having a topic is, I hope, I can get something together. But in actual fact, the person who thought about this topic really saw far ahead. So by consequence, there are many links to this chain that join together perfectly. So let's go to analyze what is the title. So hyper is for above, comes from Greek, and it means, in fact, above, beyond. So essentialism, as we know, is a philosophical current, a movement that based on the essence. So what makes special and particular an object? So some philosophers sometimes think and say that this is the essence that transforms an object into a work of art. So in some way, by consequence, it's the full. So going beyond this essence was interesting in how fashion would interpret it. So going to looking for and seeing what are the presentation, looking at the presentation and see the first thing that came immediately to mind was the one of the Matteo Tamburini in Tod's. So the debut of him, he comes from a historical brand that made that came from Bottega Veneta, who does where the essentialism is part of their heritage, and he managed to present us a product. And here, of course, there's a whole conversation opening up about fashion. Is fashion becoming product? We've just come out of a week of presentations of haute couture, where we were taken over by an emotional presentation. I'm talking about the presentation of John Galliano for Maison Margiela, who has completely left behind the concept of product for theater, for poetry, something that touches the emotional sphere that has nothing to do with product. So why is it that in Italy, or anyhow in the Milanese Fashion Week, we continue focusing on product? I given my own personal interpretation, which is this step. It's a step from the theatrical, from the incredible gestures of Alessandro Michele, creative director of Gucci, to the work of De Sarno. The work of De Sarno, who I would have loved to comment with you today, but unfortunately Gucci came with an hour late, so by consequence it was absolutely impossible to insert in the presentation. But Michele versus De Sarno, theatrical versus normal, estros towards product, flamboyant towards product. So also dreamy next to something that's actually completely real and materialistic and carnal is something that we saw from Desarno, something that we already saw in his presentation, again, who has once again presented in his own night version, which has a clear reference to what are the 90s and the sensuality presented, for example, by Tom Ford. And is there this sensuality, this carnal aspect of which we know the birth of? And it's a first great reference that we can mention within this overview, this hyper-essentialism, which has brought me to define as a first answer to this question, the minimalism. So as we know very well, minimalism has three main fundamental periods within the history of the styles: the 20s, the 60s, and the 90s, each with different characteristics, each that influence the next. But the one that particularly catches your eye about these years and something that makes it common is a particular silhouette, whether it's a bit wider or more tight-fitting or longer or shorter, we're still talking about a rectangle silhouette. This rectangle, we can find it in the 20s as a sort of a slip dress, which is something we will see will come soon, to the like a petticoat, looking at these this presentation, the trapezium of the 60s, and then again back to the petticoat of the 90s, petticoat dress. But then I had an immediate answer from what were the presentations with this very clear reference to the 20s. So we saw the rectangle shape, which has been presented by many, many designers. There's Cavalli, there's number 21, there's Max Mara, there's Rambaldi, who was also one of our guests yesterday. And this makes me understand that there is this need, this desire of linearity, of essentialism, of cleanliness that brings to another type of thought and reflection, which starts becoming being a bit more profound. So the essence of what is the use of the functionality of the dress, of the clothing. And here we can open another huge conversation and discussion, which was the base of what was the base of the catwalk of Kim Jones for Fendi. Very criticized, not very understood. Some say it brought absolutely nothing to what was the fashion week. But in actual fact, a thought, a reflection, actually, it did give me something to think about. It gave me help and support in what is the utility dress, so the useful dress. And he also said in his own words has been a source of inspiration for this collection, because the Silvia Venturini Fendi came up to a meeting with a utility dress of a historical collection of the 80s of Fendi. And from there, I started thinking about the concept of the useful dress, the utility dress, which has clear reference to a specific historical moment and to a method, which is the one of the recuperating. So going to the essence is like going into the depth and going and picking up what is necessary, leaving behind everything that is left. So the recuperating of also the recovery is actually a dynamic that is very well known from the 40s, which, seen as there were some with difficulties in getting some raw materials, it just reuses clothing that already exists or fabrics that were destined to something else. So this creation of patches, this juxtaposition, these contrasts, in some cases almost forced, give us this feeling, of course, summarized, of what is this very important concepts for the 40s. But then at some point in his interviews, he talks about romantic. Oh gosh, he speaks also about new romantic, and it took me a while. I've looked for, but I'd never found new romantic. I haven't found new romantic in what he represented. But when he speaks about romantic, he speaks about he talks about gestures, and I found a gesture that was quite intimate in the styling of Fendi, which is the one of presenting these this unfastened body. So this intimacy that is shown, that is shared. So he presents a woman that is not as rigid, a bit more natural, not so structured. And of course, we see some clear references to the uniform dress of the 40s, a clear reference of the use of more fabrics with different hands, let's say, for the composition of an outfit. But mainly, we can consider it once again as the slip dress that we saw earlier, like a quite literal suggestion of what the inspiration is that was presented. Of course, completely different impact is the Prada fashion show, where we start the same exact way with the austerity of the utility dress of the 40s, which is presented by the women and by her co-director, Raf Simons, with clear references to the 40s, with clear references that we all know that the 40s are the years of the tailleur, where you define the suit, where you define this macro rectangle, which will then become one of the most representative signs of the female apparel. And I am surprised by how you can transform something that is so rigid and so rigorous in something that is actually contemporary. We're always answering the question of hyper-essentialism. It's a line which is extremely clean and coordinated. There's no apparent surprise. They underline again the inspiration to the uniform, to the linearity, to rigidity, to the severity and austerity through some clear references, and also through the hat of the military feathered. But again, they're very clear references. The skirts that open in splits that remind almost something like a trouser, but there is a surprise. There is a surprise which personally touched me very much, which is what's underneath it and what's behind it. And there's that impact, a real surprise, because you don't expect that turning the corner or turning the cat in the catwalk, you find the behind. I put some front, of course, images so you can to highlight the concept, but something that recalls petticoats. Petticoats are those intimates of silk intimates, items that were worn under the skirts so that they wouldn't scratch on the skin, because they were made with very thick fabrics, mainly male and also mainly wool and male ones. So these short pants, because they told me then eventually that when you see the catwalk, they're actually short pants that are made in silk fabric, inspired to the linen underwear of the end of the 19th century. They present a concept which is not malice, but is a new idea of elegance. And it surprises us how the front of the items is like it's like a screen, it's like a facade, it's like an apron almost, but what's the back is completely different. It's almost as if the front was masculine and the behind was women's wear, as if the front was tweed, like rough, and behind it's silk and flowy. So the front is RAF, and the behind is Miuccia Prada. So this link surprised me, and I was very happy. This combination really surprised me because I was happy to have the silk in the front as well. It's a bit like I was happy about the opposite as well, because it was a bit like a Dirty Dancing, where you say babies can't keep her in the corner, but you have Miuccia coming at the front as well. So the underwear, so the private, the personal, the romantic. Miuccia Prada said, in this collection, you talk about feelings, about love, about romanticism. And what comes out from a whole study, a beautiful study made on the intimate wear, underwear, from the end of the 800 and 900, and these outfits made of silk embroidered by hand for the creation of these beautiful dresses. So where the design of the original lace has been translated with these inserts of fur. So these. And this is the genial part, of be able to give against what is the concept of historical nightwear inlaid with lace. You actually make it hyper-modern by inlaying it with fur. So they made a further step, which I believe is even more interesting, which is the one of transforming what were the original designs in jacquard. By consequence, we have the impact of a very poor fabric, linen and cotton, something that was intimate, private, and personal, transformed in excess through the use of a jacquard fabric. So when they asked, why is there a need of light, of material that shines because there's a darkness at the front and light behind, they answered that there is an severe time in front of us, but behind us there is hope. And this is what they suggest, a vision of not great times that aren't great, but we hope they're going to go by. The beautiful times, the good times, which are the ones that they suggest, are suggested also in the hairdo, in the exceptional study in terms of hairstyles, of beautiful hairstyles like of Miller, that were between the 20s and 30s. So you know very well that at this time, one of the greatest diffusers of trends and femininity is the cinema. So the divas, the Hollywood divas from the world of film, cinematographic world, were a great inspiration for Palau for the creation of these hairstyles. The 20s, which, as if you remembered, we mentioned at the beginning, and that still sometimes come out in the definition of this aesthetics, this minimalist aesthetic, we can find it also in these hats. The hat normally is an accessory that is pretty much unused, apart from thinking about wearing a woolly hat when it's cold. And creating this mix with two historical elements of the history of styles, I believe is really super interesting, even also for many students that are here with us today, listening and looking at these catwalks together, because it creates the mix, the reaction between two concepts that creates something new again. So we start from a historical visor, which is the visor from the Robin Hood collection 63-64 of Saint Laurent, and the famous cloche, the aerodynamic hat that is famous in the 20s. The Union creates this very contemporary hat that, however, in reality, smells of these two contaminations, of these two elements that live together. The ribbons. They asked, why ribbons? Why bows? Sorry. And she said, in all honesty, well, everyone can start from whatever they want, and we started from bows this year. And she a little bit to underline what yesterday Stefano Pilati was saying with relevance to the hyper concepts, and there are too many superstructures, when actually in reality you can start from something that is really simple and then give it structure. So they thought quite well to start from ribbons, from bows, apologies, that they are the iconographic representation by excellence of what is the concept of femininity, where femininity in Prada is always like interpreted in a transversal way. And apart from this inspiration of the 20s, with this open work bow, but they inserted the bow in 2 layers of cotton to then work it almost like sous vide. They, in a vacuum way, they did them by hand, they flattened them, they ironed them, and then they embroidered them on the material. It's not just attached onto it, but it's a ribbon, it's a bow that to which they give a different reading, a new reading, which is completely contemporary. And here, there's another chapter that opens up that, again, goes back to the concept of essence and essentialism, which is the one from where do we start from, which is a bit the base, the nucleus, the core. And to this question, the answer is super clear and short, as we start from history. History is synonymous of culture, of tradition. History is synonym of what we were. If we don't know who we were, if we don't know what we were, we can't represent something that can go forward. And on history, on the bow as an element that goes back to the history of the styles, we can mention also many designers like Yves Saint Laurent, Balenciaga, Nina Ricci. Now we are circumnavigating the 60s. Or we go between this 58 of Balenciaga until the 65 of Yves Saint Laurent, and we realize how the bow always appears to be an element, a decorative element, however not invasive. And it underlines what was the concept that we've expressed at the beginning of this step. Michele De Sarno, for example, from the hyper-decorativism to linearity. Prada answers with the bow. Flat, ironed, almost elementary, but that in reality becomes a new concept, essential concept of decorativism. We're again within the 60s, there's Courrèges, there's Cardin. And Courrèges Cardin have opened a bit of a mental chakra, as I call them, with reference within the references. So Miuccia Prada, as we know very well, she's a great she's really passionate about the 60s. So I thought, okay, that's where I think she went to pick the essence, the graphic essence of these bows. And in fact, I was right, because this dress is a Courrèges of the 69, where the neckline, the cleavage, and the cut and the position of the bow is exactly where it's then placed later. Of course, contaminated by the 20s, which is that we find with these hem with fur that we find at the end of the dress, and from the design, from the decoration that we talked about earlier, that then becomes a fur inlay. So this, I believe, is the most representative slide that lets us understand what was the creative process within the style offices of Prada in these months for the preparation of the collection. And look at how also this rose inserted in a ribbon, again, another element that characterizes these beautiful garments, is a Pierre Cardin from the 50s, where at the end of the 50s, they were in 1958, inserted by Pierre Cardin to close a neckline, inserted by Prada to maintain a a bow to make this bow emotional. The history is quoted strongly with a date, 1913, which is the date of birth of the brand Prada, which with a P and the 13 on the shoulder underlines how the importance of the history in this collection is fundamental. This collection seems like a book of illustrated history, but it's actually a collection that makes history. They put a whole number of elements, some sort of a mixer of various historical times with one very readable and linear, and this is a risk that we often have, but she's a maestro in this, but not anachronistic, extremely in line with the times. Seen as she likes them, and we're talking about history, and we can't miss out on everything. The 50s and the famous necklines and the cleavages that are draped from Dior. We're at the beginning of the 50s, 51, and the waists that are marked. Let's remember the Corolle line, which from the 1947 onwards has created what everybody knows as a new look. It's also re-proposed with this interpretation of extremely contemporary, which were the glasses with the cat eye kind of shape, which is very representative of the 50s. But she surprises us again by closing with an interpretation of history and of austerity that is different. Okay, she spoke about the 40s, she talked about Taillé, she talked about Saint Laurent time when in the 71 he presented the 40 collection. He was very much criticized because he was touching a dark period of history. Of course, she wouldn't because times have changed, but she needed another sign, another mention, another touch of austerity. And she thought quite well to talk about the Victorian austerity, the pleating, the ironing of the bows. They recall in a contemporary way, because here we're talking about nylon, the ones that were the folds of the corsets of the Victorian garments, and highlighting the back side, the end of the back, and it's nothing but a highlight. This is just highlighting an evidence of what was a reference, of course, in a completely contemporary way, because we have a biker jacket on top. So wanting to close the hyperessential concept in Prada, we can say that it's the story is the essence that Miuccia Prada wanted to insert as a fundamental element of her pieces. And we have another beautiful example, also because it's part of the Marangoni family, which is the one of Moschino. Moschino is a historical Italian brand which has received recently a big change, a drastic change of way, because, of course, who was destined to the creative direction passed away, and he was replaced by an Argentinian who arrives, and Adriana Pulata, who changes completely the plans, because with the ex-creative director, of course, they would have focused on more of a certain type of product. Adrian, is a bit more orthodox, and he preferred, well, he started in January, so he had very little time to structure a collection, but he wanted to present it anyhow, focusing on what was the history of Moschino, intended as archive. So he presented a collection which was super pleasant, very pleasant, where for the older people like me, you can recognize all the aesthetic elements of the Maison Moschino, the great question mark, the print with the clouds, the Italian flag, the concept of pace, with a symbol of pace that comes from the 70s, and the very famous smile. It's beautiful, it's very beautiful. This collection is very beautiful. The homage that the designer does to Franco Moschino. Of course, everybody is expecting from the next season letting go what is just, it's just a presentation of a history, but they want a more contemporary vision. Last but not least, of course, in the presentation of today and in the concept of going back to the archive and history, a brand that is very important to us at Blumarine, also because we will start very soon mentorship with them. Walter Chiapponi, the new creative director, who also, in this case, he reinterprets in a contemporary way and personal way, and he wanted to underline extremely poetical. The iconic graphic elements of Blumarine as a brand, the print, the design, the rose in general, which were very important both on the almost on all of his advertising campaigns of the 90s. They become a print, they become an element, they become a graphic, married with a linearity, also a hint to a concept that is street and sportswear, which is very different, opposite to what is the DNA of Blumarine. So in this case, Chiapponi is trying to create a new essence, of course, putting something of his own in it. And just like in every Blumarine catwalk, we have always the twin set, which is another iconic piece, another iconic element that represents this brand made by two pieces, where in the years between the 80s and the 90s was covered by fur, so the little jacket with the little coat in mohair underneath that was with the inlay, hemmed with the fur, is an iconic piece of the Blumarine brand. He reinterprets, and I think it makes it hyper feminine, super interesting, maintaining this poetry that he feels the need of. And we go back to the initial question, what contamination do we have of everything that we've seen? For example, parents, of this need and this want of poetry nowadays in the catwalk, in the fashion shows. Someone in this case is answering. Let's see, of course, unfortunately, fashion then has the market that decides what are the what's the fate of this. But just like every love story or poetry story that are based on feelings, we close up with this idea of new concept of bride, the historical campaign of Blumarine for Newton from the 90s, and the closing of the catwalk of Blumarine by Walter Chiapponi of today. Now, I want to thank you for the attention. I repeat, thank you so much. I repeat, I would have liked to go more in depth also with Gucci, but with an hour late, with them being an hour late, it was impossible. But let's leave these lectures open, because you've seen that every now and again I would look, because I finished the presentation 10 minutes, just 10 minutes before starting. And let's be open to what will be the presentation, tomorrow's presentation of important brands like Bottega Veneta and Jill Sander, which for sure will give an important contribution to what is the Milanese Fashion Week. Normally, I know that at this point there are questions. Okay. Yes, in fact, we're going to open up the Q&A if there are questions from our students. Otherwise, I'm going to leave the first question to you. Okay, so Antonio, one of the things that I think and I thought when you said all these beautiful things, and congratulations for the images, because you really have incredible mind. And it's like the essence was the archive. If you don't have an archive, who are you? Therefore, all these new stylists that hinge on something that they have, which is, of course, the brand, but who doesn't have an archive? What are they going to do? This is a great question. It's a beautiful question. And normally when we talk about archive, I almost get sentimental, emotional, because the possibility of visiting or touching something that is archive, something that has been preserved for time, for the next, is something beautiful. And the ones who have the possibility, let's think about the great names, the great brands like that can access archives. If they don't denature it, or if they ignore it, because this also happens, it's a great luck. I'm thinking about the designers, that the new designers, but also our students who don't have an archive base. The archive can also not be physical. It doesn't have to be physical. We can create archive. And we are so lucky with it being ours that we can create it with a mix of something physical or images and the emotional part. So our archive is something that looking and observing the world and looking at all the references of fashion, and not only that touch us on a daily basis, is something that we start making layers of, and that will then become our own personal aesthetic. So it's a method. It gives from something physical for who doesn't have it, for who doesn't have the possibility of having it, has to become something that is emotional and personal and aesthetic. Listen, have you had a quick look? I mean, it was too late to put it in the presentation, but you've seen some images from Gucci? Yes, I've seen some images from Gucci. And he brings back what is the focus of and the idea that I don't know if Sabato di Sarno or who has thought about Sabato di Sarno for the creative direction of Gucci has put in this, put them in this role. It's a lot of product. The colors are a bit repetitive, and they become a bit probably the sign of continuity again with that they still have again. The linearity of the silhouettes is definitely wanted as a sign of recognizability for the brand. It doesn't remain with you. I'm not hiding that I really looked at it very quickly, and I will go back at looking at it, but it's not something that stays impressed. It doesn't stay with you. It's product. It's the wish, I imagine, of the brand, of the holding, of to focus on the product after the extreme creativity of Alessandro Michele. Let's see where it goes. Let's see if it will be rewarding or not. In fact, we can't understand this fashion week. We can't make a whole thing of fashion week because we're still missing quite a few things, like Gucci, Bottega Veneta. Today there was Versace. Let's see what they bring. Do we have other questions? Here we go.
Hi, how are you? It's a pleasure to witness your talk. Just want to start off by saying that this 1 hour, brief 1 hour we had with you was much more insightful than most reviews I've read in the past few weeks, because I think a lot of the times big magazines and big media vehicles, they are a bit afraid of saying, is this collection good? Is this collection bad? You know, what you said about Raf Simons and Miuccia Prada, the front and the back of the garments, that I don't think I would have read that in a review. So I just wanted to congratulate by that, because of that. And if it's okay, I wanted to ask you a question about another fashion week. I know we spoke a lot about Milan Fashion Week, but do you have any opinions about the Burberry show? Because we have a new creative director now, and I've heard a lot of good things, a lot of bad things, mostly bad things. But I wanted to hear what you have to say, since I mentioned this was much more insightful than any other review.
Okay, so to comment or anyhow to analyze the work of one of the most important creatives, of contemporary creatives, is not easy. I would imagine personally also the difficulty on his behalf to get some commercial needs, to answer commercial needs, because as we know, it's a completely different brand compared to what he was, where he was coming before. What he manages to do always to maintain an integrity. By consequence, the thing that I feel like I want to say, that I want to share with you guys with reference to the Burberry collection, is its aesthetic integrity. There isn't a fold that is not thought about. There isn't a color that is not a mirror of a very deep thought and reflection. I think he represents a very high method and very contemporary way of what it means to do fashion today.
We have still to see if he will continue that, because there are the gossip and the rumors in the fashion world that he might exit soon, but we will see.
First, this is the third time that I've been to one of your amazing talks, so thank you so much. I only know 14 Italian words, and every time I come to one of your talks, I learn so much, even though I do not speak the language fluently. The way you explain it, it's easy for me, I'm an English speaker, to understand, and I learn something new, and I feel energized and inspired like every time I come. And so I just want to say thank you for the incredible presentation. Like, I am so honored every time to be here and learning from you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Infatti in questo si vede che la moda è veramente
And here we see that fashion is very transversal, that you speak the international language of fashion and it's understood. You understand also if you don't speak Italian. What we learn is the culture. That is something extremely important in fashion. Okay, so good evening. I wanted to just underline the question in the relationship between the development of the artificial intelligence, so the creative software in the world of fashion, and this talk about minimalism or essentialism, but especially the presence of an archive. So what I notice sometimes is that we risk that the use of AI to generate models without knowing, in fact, or having a culture or background, maybe it randomly creates a historical reference that can be the bow, or that can be the imitation of a uniform from a military style. However, as a creator, I'm not sure what that ribbon is really referring to, so I don't know what the history is behind it. So on one side, we risk emptying of meaning the references, because maybe I don't have the cultural background to understand its importance. But on another side, maybe I didn't know that reference, and the AI gave me that kick, that hook, to then say, oh, this aspect is important. I start from this idea that I hadn't thought about, to then develop something that can be more interesting with a reference to that imagery. So I wanted, really, actually, what I wanted was a feeling or feedback on the direction that we're going into. That, from my point of view, is very interesting, but of course, it risks having some own goals that then, in terms of culture, can be a bit risky. No, I'm a teacher, I think. No, I just wanted to do another parallelism before you answer, Antonio, that in fact we're in a phase of a great technological advancement, that however, if we bring it again to fashion, it's not very different from the 60s, from the 2030s, where there has always been a technological advancement that was important, where we could always have some sort of a essentialism, if not flattening, depending on how you want to see it, for the production processes, for the facilitation of production process. There's a parallelism also in this. Yes, but I'm going to go back to what Diana was saying, which is very correct, and that I share. There's the example of how in history, all the great technological innovation had two developments. I've always had two developments and two groups of, let's say two groups of developments. The first one that has always followed the development, the innovation, the technology. Let's think in the 20s, the technology could have been, for example, an extension of the railway, but contemporary. At the same time, there's someone who went into nature and created the liberty aesthetics. So by consequence, even today, the artificial intelligence is a very, very useful tool in support of what is creativity. But of course, by introducing what is the sensitive, the emotional part, which is the one that the AI doesn't have, it can't be represented to best. The artificial intelligence doesn't have to take over, but it's an extra tool, a further tool, very interesting, extra contemporary also tool that should help us. So by consequence, you know, let it be welcome. In creativity, I think that it can also give us a different view of what is then a path that then we can have to bring forward on our own. And there are some of our students, for example, that are developing this also with their own personal relationships. Yes, also it's not very easy to find cultural references because you can find every single image, even online, then you find references that are also incorrect or wrong. So yes, you're given back an image that, however, is placed into a catalog with someone who has a wrong reference that then can also take you away from, you know, it can also mislay you. So the context of the reference is very important. Yes, we often find images that they say it's from the 60s, but actually they're from the 20s. So it happens really often. I have another question from the audience. Okay, you just read my mind. So first of all, I wanted to thank you because really I think that today you are the real representation, representative of the fact that all of us, especially our students, have to understand that without culture, everything else, you know, and fashion has less of a meaning, because the reading that you gave us today really goes and looks for a huge cultural baggage that, however, you have to have, also even just to understand it. So you imagine it and you interpret it and you also let us understand it. So thank you so much. It was very interesting also the step that you did in the parallelism between, of course, Michele and De Sarno. But you made me come to mind a question that I've always had and that I'm going to take advantage and ask you. How much, really, how much does a creative director can have the freedom and the responsibility of bringing his culture and what is his experience and his savoir-faire, his creativeness, really in a brand? Hi, Christina. It's a question that is very difficult. Well, it's an answer that is not easy. It's a question that is not easy to answer because there's a part that is very important, which is the one of the company structure. The very moment that you have a CEO, a visionary CEO that gives you, like, you know, carte blanche, and he's completely not interested in what is the profit, especially in initial phase, well, then that is the promised land, and it's wonderful for the creatives. The exact moment in which you are within certain company dynamics and budget and bottom line growth, unfortunately, given by people that sometimes, yeah, there are like CEOs until the day before, but till the day before, maybe there were CEOs of, I don't know, company of tortellini or pasta. So they only do numbers. They don't know, they don't understand what fashion is. So then there, unfortunately, we have the fleece with the big writing on it, or and the easy bag, and but there is a but it's beautiful and it's challenging, I think, for a creative, generally speaking, to be able to give a hit to what is a shot to what is the company's request by maintaining, however, its creative soul. And that is very difficult. And our students do this on a daily basis because they confront themselves with us, and we're not their CEOs, but we give them direction. But this helps them to grow, or it helps them to have a creativity that is not the one that is just, art for its art's sake, but it's a creativity that is directed towards something that is an object, and that has to be worn, and that has to answer to a big question, which is desirability. Yes, then there's the CEO that allows you to do everything. Like, in fact, we saw the beauty of artisanal and of Margiela in the haute couture and the Parisian haute couture, thanks to the availability of Renzo Rosso, of giving a year of preparation with all the possible budget to make it, in fact. But then on the other side, there will also be designers or creative directors that can work with pressure, with limitations, which is another form of art. And there are people who manage and people who can't, people who can do it well and people who can't. Okay, other questions? Good afternoon, first of all. Hi, Vittorio. I wanted to ask a question on my own observation, which was right or wrong, I don't know. Do you think that there's a sort of black and white that is creating in fashion, talking about emotions and the simplicity of a product? So we saw in Margiela, for example, and they took the emotion all to extremes, but we found some simplicity. Even simplicity was brought to the extreme, this sort of black and white. There's no longer a center, a point in which things are touching each other. We're losing probably that center. Now, a point in which everything is touching is a center. It's a nice as image, this kind of limbo where I don't know if I'm black or white, and it could also be like a market, a niche that is not covered yet. So maybe who talks about a product development, could be interesting to understand what's in between. Careful that from the extreme poetics and the emotional to the extreme opposite, which is a rigorous coldness, there's an interpretation that can be made in a bit of a different way. It's not that ones are feelings and the linearity is not feelings, okay? In fact, no, let's think about minimalism of the 90s, the conceptual of the 90s. The problem is that now we tend to be very superficial. And that is the problem, I think. Not the making it essential, but making it superficial. So surrounded and bombarded by a lot of product that is superficial, of course, in the moment that we see something that touches us, that touches our emotional sphere, we go crazy. And what comes in is then the concept of desirability that we were talking about earlier. So the problem, I believe, is that these opposites have not been created, this black and white, but the white, let's say, as in feeling, has been completely muted, annulled in favor of a product, and not cancelled, and not to a rational idea on a code. Let's think about Jill Sander, her, the lady. So it's a complex thought, and I hope that in the short term that we will be able to have a return to the study of the garment. What Pilati was saying yesterday is wonderful, to think of working on more than once or twice on a waist and pulling it up is something that a designer should be doing.